There are images that speak, and then there are images that scream. This is one of them. Captured in 1936, in the heart of Nazi Germany. An ocean of hands salutes the Führer in perfect unison. Every face aligned, every body obedient. Every single person in that photograph. Except one. In the upper right quadrant of the image, he stands still. His arms remain folded across his chest. His face, unreadable. His message, undeniable. That man was August Landmesser. And in that moment, with nothing but the silence of his own body, he committed an act of defiance that could have cost him everything. And eventually did. But who was he? Why didn't he raise his hand? And what secret, what heartbreak, what love pushed him to stand alone in a crowd drunk on fear? This isn't just a story about resistance. It's about the human cost of conscience. It's about love in an era of hate. It's about how one man's silent no echoes louder than 1,000 shouted yes. Because sometimes, the most powerful form of protest is doing nothing at all. August wasn't born a hero. He wasn't born with a banner in his hand or speeches in his mouth. He was born poor, ordinary, invisible, just like millions of others. But that's what makes this image so terrifyingly powerful. Because it proves something most of us are afraid to admit. Sometimes the line between complicity and courage is only one decision wide. Let's rewind the clock. Before the photo, before the moment, before the war, there was a young man and a woman he loved. And that love would become the reason for everything that followed. He met her in 1934. She was different from anyone he had ever known. Her name was Irma Eckler. She was soft-spoken but strong, proud, elegant, and full of fire. She believed in justice. She believed in people. And she was Jewish. In a time when anti-Semitism was spreading like wildfire through every street, every classroom, and every headline. August didn't care. He didn't care about politics. He cared about her. They fell in love quickly, intensely. They walked hand in hand through the streets of Hamburg, laughing, planning, dreaming. They applied for marriage. And that's when the system struck back. The year was 1935. The Nuremberg laws had just passed. Laws that declared love illegal. Laws that stripped Jews of their citizenship and banned marriage between Aryans and Jews. Their application was denied, not because they weren't committed, but because she was the wrong kind of human. Still, they didn't give up. They lived together anyway. They had a daughter, Ingrid, in 1935. For a brief moment, they found a way to carve out happiness in a collapsing world. But happiness under tyranny is dangerous. And in 1937, August was arrested for dishonoring the race. That was the actual crime listed in his file. He was thrown into prison for loving someone the regime said he shouldn't. Irma was pregnant with their second child. While August sat in a jail cell, she was taken by the Gestapo, sent from one prison to another, and eventually to a concentration camp. They never saw each other again. Their second daughter, Irene, was born in prison, ripped from her mother's arms and placed in an orphanage. Everything August loved was vanishing. His family, his freedom, his future. And yet, in 1936, before the arrests, before the horror, that photo was taken. And now, we begin to understand it. It wasn't just a man refusing to raise his arm. It wasn't just a man crossing his arms during a salute. It was a man screaming silently to the world, "I will not be part of this. Not while they destroy the woman I love. Not while they call my children abominations. Not while they ask me to betray what I know is right." Because sometimes, doing nothing is the loudest scream you can make. After serving time in prison, August was given a condition. He could walk free if he ended the relationship. If he abandoned Irma. If he denied his daughters. If he denied everything that made him human. He refused. So the state did what tyrannies always do. It made him disappear, without blood, without trial, without mercy. In 1938, he was arrested again, this time sent to a penal battalion, a death sentence dressed in a uniform. They called it military service. But these were not soldiers. They were forced laborers. Men condemned to march into Soviet fire without weapons, without protection, without a way back. August Landmesser died in 1944. Official cause: missing in action. Unofficial truth: he was thrown into the meat grinder of war as punishment for loving the wrong woman. And Irma? Her trail ends at Ravensbrück, a name that still tastes of ash and screams. It was one of the most notorious women's concentration camps in the Nazi system. Irma Eckler never came out. Records suggest she was murdered in early 1942, likely in the gas chambers of Bernburg, a euthanasia center where thousands were exterminated quietly, efficiently, invisible deaths for invisible people. Their daughters, Ingrid and Irene, survived, but not without scars. They were separated, raised in orphanages, their identities erased, rewritten, their parents' names whispered and silenced. And yet, they carried the weight of that photo. A legacy burned into history by one man's refusal to raise his hand. That moment in 1936, when August folded his arms in defiance, wasn't an accident. It wasn't hesitation. It was a final whisper before the world tried to crush him. A whisper that said, "I will not be a machine. I will not play a part in this theater of hate. I will not betray my family, even if the cost is my life." And the world, though silent for decades, eventually listened. For decades, no one talked about the man in the photo. No museums, no textbooks, no plaques. It was just an old black and white image buried in archives, a sea of raised arms frozen in time. Until one day, someone noticed. In the mid-1990s, a German newspaper published the image, asking readers if they could identify the man who stood still. And someone did. His name came forward like a ghost: August Landmesser. It was his daughter, Irene, who spoke out. She had seen the photo before, many times. It was in her family album, passed down quietly, carried like a wound. And she remembered what her mother told her. She remembered the man who disappeared. She remembered the silence that followed. Historians reviewed the image, compared the facial features, verified the location and date. And slowly, the world began to believe. It was him, August Landmesser, the man who refused to salute. One frozen moment, captured by accident, recovered by fate, became one of the most iconic symbols of moral resistance in modern history. And it wasn't because of speeches. It wasn't because of power. It was because of quiet, because of stillness, because when the world screamed conform, he simply said no, not with his mouth, but with his body. A body that would be broken, a voice that would be erased, but a soul that would outlive the empire that tried to silence him. The Nazis are gone. Their flags are dust. Their slogans echoes. But that photo remains. That defiant pair of arms, folded like iron. That face, calm in the midst of madness. That single refusal, strong enough to tear through time. And it reminds us of something we often forget. History is not just made by generals and kings. It is made by ordinary people. People like August Landmesser. People who say no when it matters most. It's easy to look at that photo now and think, I would have done the same. I would have folded my arms too. I would have stood up. But would you? Because August Landmesser didn't make that decision in a classroom. He didn't make it in a documentary or a safe conversation decades later. He made it in real time, in the middle of a crowd, in front of the Führer, under the weight of real danger, with real consequences. And he paid the price. He lost his job. He lost his freedom. He lost the woman he loved. He lost his life. For one moment of truth. One decision. And here's the part that breaks something deep inside. No one applauded him. No one followed his lead. No one even noticed at the time. He vanished into history like so many others. But that photo, that accidental, miraculous photo, saved his voice. And now, decades later, millions of people see it and pause. Millions feel something stir. Millions are reminded that silence can be strength. That stillness can be louder than thunder. That dignity can look like crossed arms in a storm of obedience. So the question isn't just, who was August Landmesser? The question is, when your moment comes, when the world asks for your hand, when fear tells you to fall in line, will you? Or will you stand, like he did? Will you fold your arms, even if no one's watching? Even if it costs you something? Even if it costs you everything? Because history doesn't always come with warning signs. Sometimes it arrives like a whisper, like a decision, like a photo you didn't know was being taken. So remember him, not because he was perfect, not because he was famous, but because he was human. And in a time when being human was punishable by death, he chose to stay human anyway. That's courage. That's resistance. That's legacy. One man, one moment, one photo, and a silence that still speaks. It's easy to look at that photo now and think, I would have done the same. I would have folded my arms too. I would have stood up. But would you? Because August Landmesser didn't make that decision in a classroom. He didn't make it in a documentary or a safe conversation decades later. He made it in real time, in the middle of a crowd, in front of the Führer, under the weight of real danger, with real consequences. And he paid the price. He lost his job. He lost his freedom. He lost the woman he loved. He lost his life. For one moment of truth. One decision. And here's the part that breaks something deep inside. No one applauded him. No one followed his lead. No one even noticed at the time. He vanished into history like so many others. But that photo, that accidental, miraculous photo, saved his voice. And now, decades later, millions of people see it and pause. Millions feel something stir. Millions are reminded that silence can be strength. That stillness can be louder than thunder. That dignity can look like crossed arms in a storm of obedience. So the question isn't just, who was August Landmesser? The question is, when your moment comes, when the world asks for your hand, when fear tells you to fall in line, will you? Or will you stand, like he did? Will you fold your arms, even if no one's watching? Even if it costs you something? Even if it costs you everything? Because history doesn't always come with warning signs. Sometimes it arrives like a whisper, like a decision, like a photo you didn't know was being taken. So remember him, not because he was perfect, not because he was famous, but because he was human. And in a time when being human was punishable by death, he chose to stay human anyway. That's courage. That's resistance. That's legacy. One man, one moment, one photo, and a silence that still speaks. Today, the photo of August Landmesser appears in places far beyond where it was taken. It hangs on the walls of human rights museums. It's printed in textbooks on ethics and history. It's studied by students in Germany, the US, Japan, and beyond. It has been used by protest movements, civil rights organizations, and campaigns for moral courage. It even inspired films and documentaries, not about battles or politics, but about one man, in one moment, choosing conscience over survival. You see it posted online with captions like, "Be like him. Dare to be different." Real courage is quiet. Some people print it on posters. Others tattoo it on their skin. To them, it's not just a historical artifact. It's a mirror that asks, what would you do? And in that way, August Landmesser is more alive now than he ever was in his lifetime. Not because he wanted attention, not because he sought glory, but because in an age where millions were swept into silence, he chose to speak with his stillness. And the world, slowly, painfully, has come to honor that. In 2001, the German government officially recognized what happened to him and Irma. They acknowledged the injustice. They acknowledged the loss. It was too late for August, too late for Irma, but not too late for the truth. And maybe, just maybe, that's what the photo is really about. Not just resistance, not just bravery, but redemption. A way for us to say, we see you now. We know what you did, and we will not forget. Because in the end, every regime falls. Every dictator fades. But truth survives in photographs. in memory, in the choices we make when no one is looking. So yes, the salute was mandatory. But so was the silence. And in that silence, August carved something eternal. It's strange, isn't it? That one man's refusal to lift his arm has lifted millions out of ignorance. That a face once ignored by history now stares back at us, clear, unafraid. That in a photo filled with 1,000 hands raised in obedience, we only remember the one that stayed down. Because what we crave most is not perfection. It's authenticity, integrity, a reminder that courage still exists. Not on stages, but in shipyards. Not in speeches, but in moments. And August's moment has become ours. Every time you scroll past a headline, every time you witness injustice, every time someone says, "That's just the way it is," his folded arms ask you, "Is it?" You don't need to raise your voice to make history. You don't need an army behind you. Sometimes all it takes is to hold your ground when everything tells you to kneel. Because the world doesn't change in explosions. It changes in whispers, in footsteps that stop moving, in hands that don't comply, in choices no one sees but you. And that's why this image matters. Not because it's old, but because it's timeless. Not because it's dramatic, but because it's honest. And maybe, just maybe, we all have a moment like this in our lives. A moment when everyone around us chooses comfort over conscience. When the cost of speaking up feels too high. When silence feels easier, safer. But if August could do it, in front of a dictator, in the heart of fascism, while everything he loved was on the line, then what's our excuse? His story isn't meant to shame us. It's meant to awaken us, to remind us that history isn't just behind us. It's in us, waiting. So the next time you see that photo, don't just see a man in a crowd. See a challenge. See a choice. See yourself. August Landmesser didn't live to see what his courage became. He never knew his photo would be rediscovered. He never knew that millions of people, decades later, would whisper his name with reverence. He died thinking he had lost. But history had other plans. He was just a man, a dock worker, a father, a husband. He had no weapon, no followers, no headline. But he had a line he wouldn't cross. And sometimes, that's enough to outlive an empire. We often look at history as something distant, wars, treaties, leaders, monuments. But the truth is, history is made of moments like his. Moments when no one is watching. Moments when you stand alone. Moments when your heart whispers, "This is wrong." And you listen. The Nazis tried to erase him. Tried to erase Irma. Tried to erase their love, their family, their future. But that photo, that single frozen frame, did what regimes fear most. It remembered. And because it remembered, so do we. We remember not just the horror, but the humanity. Not just the destruction, but the defiance. Not just the victims, but the ones who resisted quietly, completely, without ever asking to be heroes. And in that remembering, we carry their story forward. Into classrooms, into conversations, into choices we haven't made yet. Because the truth is, we don't need more statues. We need more mirrors, more reminders that the fight for dignity never ends, and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stand still. So today, as you go back to your life, your phone, your job, your family, take one thing with you. That you don't need to be loud to be strong. You don't need to be many to be right. And you don't need to be perfect to be remembered. You just need to be willing to be the only one. The only one who says no. The only one who doesn't raise a hand. The only one who remembers that silence is not the absence of action, but the presence of conscience. Maybe you'll never be tested like August was. Maybe your moment won't come in front of a dictator. Maybe it'll come in a boardroom, in a classroom, in a quiet conversation when someone says something cruel and everyone laughs. Maybe it'll come when it's easier to stay quiet, to blend in, to raise your hand with the rest of the crowd. And when it does, when that moment comes, remember him. Remember that the world doesn't just need more followers. It needs interrupters. It needs the one hand that doesn't move, the one heart that won't lie. The photo of August Landmesser is not just about the past. It's a guide for the future. It teaches us that conscience isn't loud. It's not celebrated. It's not always safe. But it's worth everything. Because while obedience builds empires, conscience builds history. So here's the question that remains. When no one is watching, when the cost is real, when your soul is on the line, will you raise your hand? Or will you fold your arms, look the world in the eye, and say with your silence, not this, not now, not me?